Michael, we're waiting for the president. We're expecting him to speak shortly. I'll interrupt when he comes to the podium. I don't yet have a 2-minute warning. Nightmare scenarios, they laid it out for us. The nightmare scenario is there's a terrorist attack that kills U.S. personnel. We're there. Now what do we do?
Shepard, thank you for your eloquent reporting at such a tragic moment. I think, the key question, obviously, for me and many others will be who carried out the attack and how well can we really identify the perpetrator. And my strong presumption is that this was ISIS, or the variant of ISIS known as ISIS-K. So the same general movement that held forth and held territory in Iraq and Syria starting in 2014 that sent various terrorists or inspired them for the attacks in Europe and in San Bernardino in the United States and elsewhere in that time period. And that has always just been in favor of reckless violence. It doesn't have a big, complicated strategy. It's even less cunning than al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda spent, as you know, months preparing the 9/11 attacks, and they had internal debates over whether to go for big sensational strikes and where to carry those out. ISIS, by contrast, is just about killing people. And it worked for them, in a sense, because in that period of 2014, 15, 16, they gathered a lot of support and recruits from all over the world. People poured into the caliphate. They got money. They got, again, shadow followers all over the world who carried out these attacks that were motivated by ISIS and just carried them out by themselves without any great planning or superstructure. So ISIS just sort of turns people loose to create mayhem. Now, having said that, there can be cells, there can be greater levels of localized organization, but ISIS wouldn't care about August 31st. It wouldn't care about a Taliban promise to, show restraint until that point. And in fact, ISIS and the Taliban historically have been enemies within Afghanistan, not because the Taliban are somehow more pure or ethical necessarily, but because the Taliban don't want the competition for power and control. And so I could be wrong, but my strong presumption is that this was not a Taliban decision. I'm not trying to defend or admire the Taliban in any way, and I've never been a fan of the August 31st deadline. And I think that President Biden made a mistake by committing to it so publicly. But my guess is that ISIS doesn't really care about that deadline at all. And they'll carry out attacks before or after August 31st as they are able. And that's just their MO.
The ISIS has been fighting with the Taliban in the eastern part of Afghanistan for the better part of the last 3 years. When the Taliban arrived to take over control of Kabul and went to the prisons, they found ISIS-K, Islamic State, and the Khorasan leaders, and they shot and killed them right away. Those two are mortal enemies, and there we are in the middle. The Taliban have been tasked and promised to provide our security. The very best thing that could happen for ISIS-K would be to kill some Americans, with the Taliban being the ones who are supposed to provide the security, and that's where we are. So I don't know how the Taliban reacts in country. I'd like your thoughts on that, and how the United States now reacts in the wake of what's just taken place.
Well, the Taliban might decide to try harder to find these kinds of bombs and laden explosives before they are employed, because, as you know, it's very hard to stop a truck like this at the final point of approach. We don't, for all the great technology we don't have ways of sensing the presence of explosives from many miles away. And so we can't use spy satellites to figure out where these trucks are. And unless we happen to have watched the truck get loaded in a place where we know that there are materials, that sort of thing. So the way you stop these is through a complex overlapping web of intelligence and checkpoints. And we used to have that in Afghanistan, working with the Afghan army and police before we decided to pull out. And again, I still strongly disagree with President Biden's April decision, largely because it set up this kind of possibility. But the Taliban now are the only people on the ground that have the capacity to try to create that kind of a system of multiple checkpoints. It's not foolproof, and they might be trying their hardest to stop these kinds of future attacks and miss one. But I think that, the question now becomes, how do we give them incentives to help? And it's a crazy, brave new world where we're having to try to induce the Taliban to help protect American troops when we've been shooting at each other until just recently for many, many years.
Michael, there are millions and millions and millions of dollars that have been frozen. We've already offered the Taliban a bribe. We've already said, we'll give you this airport and we'll get out if you'll provide us security. And of course, they didn't. Maybe they tried, maybe they didn't try. I don't have any way of knowing, but it didn't work. They are not a trustworthy entity. But we have all of this money that's frozen that could be given over to them as another bribe. I don't know how you make that decision now, but it's certainly a possibility.
You're right. And I think that is the main leverage we have. It's their access to Afghanistan's existing bank accounts, but also any future aid and diplomatic recognition we might give them as a United States government, as an international community. Again, not having our diplomats, our intelligence personnel, our Afghan partners on the ground any longer, we don't really have the kind of, detailed, granular information that helps you deduce if the Taliban is trying to help. It's pretty hard to figure that out from a distance. And so I'm with you.